here is the enjoyable predicament I am in. I want to give you guys a very good wiring video. I want to show you how to make a car that it does everything. It's as many stock features as possible run with all aftermarket stuff. This is one hell of an ECU. I am very impressed. Between this and my power control module, which just allows you to send high power to other things, we can control the whole car. You will almost think that it is a stock car, not a funny way, but actually windows, all the turn signals, pop-ups, all that stuff, all controlled from two distinct things. This is a representation of a lot of wildness. The flying lead harness that Haltech will provide you, rather expensive if you're thinking about it, but it's actually completely worth it when you really think about it or if you got experience. The downside to this is that these are not Tefsel wires. The positive is that they're much cheaper and easier. They're all different colors. It's a beautiful thing. And even the ECU software references each of these colors. So as a beginner or intermediate, this is amazing. I would stick with this. But I want to make a control center. I want to make a center area where everything from the car is controlled from there, and it's like a switchboard. And the switchboards get really, really messy. Even this, and this is still missing about 20 some wires. I've been working on where the ECU is going to sit in the car. I've been coming at it from all these different angles, and none of them are easy. So I figured out a low stress, low risk method that I'm going to do this, and it lets me just focus on one specific thing and then take it a step further. So let me show you the diagram. Before we go too far into my diagram, here is their diagram. These are all the connections that are capable on this ECU / power distribution module, PDM. So between this PDM and ECU, these are all the connectors possible. I am using all of these minus 6. That's how much I'm putting this to use. This is the core of my car. This is all going to sit in one core area right behind the dash. That's why it looked like the way it did before, is I did each of these were like a section at a time. Like, okay, you know what, the all-wheel drive system, let me run that. Oh, the fuel pumps, the brake pressure sensor, the rear tail lights. It just keeps adding on. It really does. It's partial ineptitude and a lot of chaos. Down here is actually another representation of how these are going across from the different connectors on the computer to the different terminals that I want to connect to. And that's what all of these are. This is 2 of these. This is 2 of these. This is 1, 1, and 1. Literally, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 connectors that this 5 connectors have to go to on the ECU. I went and mapped all of that out. The software for this program is amazing, and I was able to then take a different approach to this, and this will work really well. I went to the ECU software and said, how many 22 gauge wires am I going to be using, and what colors do I want them to be? And so I broke it down into, okay, you know what? I need 4 of the black ones, 40 of the white, 8 green, and these colors, generally speaking, are like white wires are normally sensors, green are like digital outs, or blue can be digital out. Yellow is like ignition, blue is injection, red, white I use for 5 volts, and so on. You see there's kind of a general theme to that. Then I realized, okay, there's some twisted pairs, you know, throttle body, E-gate, and then tons of high current power being ran to these. So those are larger gauge and red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to waste about $10. It's going to be a total of $10 in extra wire. But we were just going to say, you know what? The total width of the dashboard area is like 22 inches, but we're going to go to 3 feet. So it's 36 inches wide. And I'm going to get all 84 22 gauge wires. Most of them will be cut down maybe about a foot. So let's say that we waste 84 times 1 feet. That's 84 feet. The Tefsel wiring is about 30 cents a foot. So 30 cents a foot times 10 feet is $3 times 8. 3 times 8 is 24. Okay, so I'm wasting $24 potentially. Not all of them are going to be shortened. But $24 versus my sanity and be able to kind of get this done much quicker. So what I'm going to do is go and cut 84 different colored 22 gauge wires, cut 12 18 gauge wires, get 2 twisted pair things in there, 3 of the big boys down here. The core harness is hidden right in there. And I'm basically going to play Barbies and comb its hair. And like, you know what, I'm going to zip tie this part over here. You know what, it looks better this way. Let's fold it this way. And that allows me to figure out the best aesthetic way to have all these wires come out of here. I was originally going to go all computer, all engine this way. But each of these connectors split. So this is all the car, this is all the engine. It doesn't feel right. So what I think I am going to do is have all these go to a central knot and then break out as they go. And that central knot, when I did all this math, put it all into the computer, ended up being slightly over ½ an inch in diameter. So it is not going to look like this does now. These are much thicker wires. The Tefsel wiring will really make it look about that big. At the end of the day, it'll look way less intimidating. I'm gonna have nice boots on there, make it super clean. You gotta start somewhere, and you gotta find your own personal approach to it. Maybe I could use it as like a little rat tail. I used to have a rat tail in elementary school. But you know what? Thanks to Keeps, I have hair to make bad decisions with my haircuts, especially when I get busier. Einstein comes out and, well, at least you can see that I have hair to make an Einstein haircut. Especially at this age, for me, being 38 now, 2 out of every 3 men experience some form of male pattern baldness by the age of 35. I and both my brothers were all people that experienced that, but thankfully, I was ahead of the game and focused on preventing hair loss. And that's what Keeps is all about, keeping the hair that you have. And they've got a lot of different choices and solutions for doing that. You can go to their website, very easy to navigate, understand, explains all the different options you have and what they can do for you, all right in one spot. And on top of that, their subscription service makes it easy for me to be focused on this. It just all gets delivered here. I don't have to worry about it. I can keep my hair, I can keep working. Everything is great in my life. If you're interested in learning more about Keeps, they have a special offer if you go to keeps.com/RobDahm to learn more. That's KEEPS.com/RobDahm. Here are all those wires, and they're color coded for their stock harness. Those are all those wires that are currently assigned in my harness. It's actually pretty impressive how much is going on in this harness. I took all that and then went into CAD and said, okay, well, if it was 1, 2, 3, 4 layers wide, each of these are 22 gauge tefsels, what's the theoretical number of wires I could have in this? And this ends up being like 90 something in there. So I can fit all of those 84 wires into something like this, deal with the power separately, but look at, so 0.25 inches here to here, so that's half an inch. It's slightly less than half an inch in diameter. That's amazing. That's smaller than all the other harnesses in any other car of mine, and it's gonna be everything. We're gonna go ahead and put this harness up on the table and disconnect it from the ECU, just to show you in reference what these two are gonna look like and how different they will look. And I am not knocking this one. In fact, this one's got 10 feet of wire on all these, so if you didn't see all that, if you just saw this, really what we're comparing is this to what the Tefsel one will look like. That's what this harness would get you. I'm not damaging this harness because it will come in handy if we need to do another car with this, and it's not the 4-rotor, but who am I kidding? I'm gonna end up going Mil-Spec. Like, I'm obsessed with this now. I just hunted the UPS guy down. He's been dodging the shop for 2 days. It's not a UPS overall company thing, it's a guy. And I took pictures of this. This is a 100% honest story. You guys from Patreon saw I was literally tracking this guy for the last 2 days. I caught him at a McDonald's parking lot, and then as the time went on, he actually ended up going down to Lowe's right here, and that's when I got him. I stood outside and waited for him. So there he is. And the truck, I could have stole the truck, honestly. It was just beep, beep, beep. I thought he was in the back reorganizing it. He was in Lowe's dropping shit off. So he's doing his job. Or he was going for personal. Anyway, long story short, I'm like, dude, I'm looking for you. And he's like, my guy. He was like, no way, my guy. He's so California. I'm like, yeah, I got one of my packages on there. He goes, way? No way. Like, he didn't say no. He didn't say no, there's no way. He was just like, what? And I showed him the app. He goes, you know what's on my truck? I'm like, no, I know where my, like on my package. He goes, dude, that's mind blowing. And he was like, I need to tell somebody that UPS is tracking me. He was actually so blown away. He didn't know that I could see where he was at. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of chasing you around a little bit. He goes, dude, that's like some next level like technology shit. I wish I'd recorded it. I didn't want to. The guy was really nice and all that, but he was like, "You sure you're at your shop, like the shop address?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, it's a shop." As I've learned, UPS, especially here, drops off businesses during the day and then tries to get to houses at the end of the night. I'm like, "Oh, that's my shop and everything." But needless to say, avoided no longer. I have the rest of the 4-rotor core of the wiring.
You wanna open it?
No, I just want to tell that story. Mixed with the Haltech and this is going to be one of the nastiest core of a car I've ever seen. This just takes everything up one major step. And so I've been friends with these guys on Facebook for a while and didn't really realize the quality of their products. Long story short, it's a company called ECU Master. I've got my ECUs, I've got that. But these guys, while they have ECUs for different cars, they have something utterly insane for the Ford. So this thing right here. Oh my God. It is even crazier than I thought it was.
Dude.
That's smaller than I thought it was.
No way.
Yeah, my God. Wow. The pictures actually made it look bigger than this. Look at that. Mil-Spec Connectors, both for lower amperage outputs and also the inputs for this thing. And of course, you know, CAN bus and whatnot, but look at that. This whole like almost custom auto sport setup. These are all 12 gauge pins. This thing is capable of 200 amps of power flowing through it and being distributed out to the car, much less of course all the logic and everything behind the scenes that control those things. So we're gonna be controlling fuel system, we're gonna be controlling the all-wheel drive system, the air pump system, headlights, turn signals, all of that through this. No fuses, no relays, nothing else, all through this piece. And this little thing right here is one of those nice, like kind of the Sherlock sort of things. So between this and the ECU, this combo, that's the brain of my entire car. And you don't see fuses sticking out. We don't have to have special other boxes. All of that's controlled right here. I am blown away at how small this thing is. This approach makes the tools needed very simple. One is a measurement, a reference, which of course I was in the car, and really the actual total wire length is about 22 inches. But we're gonna also be twisting them potentially, so you add 20% there, so you know, whatever, 26 inches or so. But then I just want the flexibility of rerouting things, so we're just going to use a yardstick. Makes that extra, either both sides, whether it's the side to the ECU or the side to the connectors, we got extra room. Zip ties, obviously, cutters, and then finally a list of what you're going to do. So what we're going to do is we'll do the 40 white ones last. We'll go through all the other colors. We won't break into those unless we have to. But we'll go ahead and start making all these wires and then collect them all together. So there's our 4 black wires. Get them all to the spice right there. And we're just gonna zip tie the tips of these together. So that's that. We're gonna go to the 8 green ones. We're probably gonna go run to the GoPro so you guys can see the amount of time it takes to do this. But I don't get to fast forward, I always hate that. There are 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 green. The last wire, these last 2 are just in the 40 pack, but I just wanted to have them separate because I'm going to use them for something different than the normal sensor. There we go. There is all of the wires right here. So what is very, very impressive about this. Some people might not like my way of rapid prototyping like this, but I now have an all-wheel drive 4-rotor core data chassis harness right there. Like I estimated on the CAD program.
Wow.
Isn't that insane? And those aren't even, you know, twisted and done right, but that's minus all the heavier things here, which we'll add in a second. That's 84 wires. I was so afraid that you saw the cluster that was up there. That wasn't even all the wires. This will be something where we'll start from right here, have a knot where they all go together within reason. Now it doesn't look so intimidating to have it go to each of the connectors, all 7 of the other connectors. Even though behind the scenes, a lot of people don't want to, they'll look at my wiring document and laugh. That's still what's happening. That's logically what's happening. That's what the certain wires are going to twist from this one to that one. But now that they're all going to the center, they cross over, but you don't know that. The major benefit of Tefsel is if you did this with that one, it'd be much harder to make it look like as if it was all cohesive because it'd look more like this, even though that's still the same thing that's going on. This whole thing of wire is all good. That's all the small wires. But I am doing something different. This is a new thing for me. These are twisted pair, and this is 20 feet of 20 gauge, and this is 25 feet of 22 gauge. So the drive-by-wire, I want that in this harness, but I do not want it talking to the rest of the harness. But the throttle fighting is going to create some amperage and everything, so I'm going to use this, ground the shield out, and so that way it'd be ran in the harness without a problem. So one of these for that, one of these for the one-way skate, and then one of these for the crank angle sensor. Way different than the big, thick stalk that you've seen in the other video I did on the whole wiring harness. Way smaller. That'll probably be the core of the harness. And then we're actually going to go down, we're this far in. Now we're going to go into 18 gauge wires, and these are all power wires. That's why I got these. Now we need 11 red. That's 11 times 2, 33 feet. It's amazing how quick this adds up. And this is just the core harness. We haven't even talked about the runs to the parts of the car. Like one of these runs a fuel pump, and before you think that's too small, it's a 6 amp fuel pump. These small wires are meant for what, 7, 8 amps, something like that. One of these is for the headlights, which they're LED. They take like 1.5 amps at like full running. Same thing with like turn signals. Like all those are LED. So we're gonna do 11 of these. Now this is thicker. It's gonna make a big difference on how we think about the wire, and this will have torque. Like it's not shielded. I'm gonna have it close to the center, but not fucking up my ECU stuff. So I keep finding faster ways to do all this. I did on this table somewhere. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Wait, whoa.
The cat. What are you doing? What are you doing, baby kitty? You be baby kitty? Yeah, you just stared at me. 9. I made her try and use the cat door with it closed, and she just stared at me from this side. That's how the cat was the whole time. It was hilarious. I ended up opening it up, and I taught her that. I kept swinging it right in front of her face, and the cat door. I kept swinging the cat door in front of her face, and just to be like, hey, look, it goes back and forth, and she's just like, I don't care. Okay, so that should be 11 red. Keyword should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There we are.
Cool, you can count.
Dude, I got a lot of things I can do. That was all to replace these. Mil-Spec wiring is actually part of Motec.
Whoa.
So, you know it's expensive. This was the first place I tried, and then when I found ProWire, I was like, oh, this is way faster, way cleaner and everything. I actually kind of like this, that this is...
More plastic?
Oh, no. These are 16 gauge. This is 18.
So you got to do that all again?
Damn it. Those are all 16 gauge. No, it really felt like beefy. Yeah, that's
Can we still use these?
yeah, we'll save those for something. The core harness doesn't use. You know what? We'll use these. The PDM. I like this because it's way smaller now. The last part. 3 10 gauge wires, and this is where I'm very excited because check this out. This is 8 gauge. We'll be running that for a different reason. Make sure I get the right one this time. This is 10 gauge wire. What is so fascinating about this is around this size of wire, I would not trust anything but Tefsel at this point because like all the stuff you find on Amazon, it's horrifying. And that like this is the sort of stuff you're going to use for your fans or your fuel pumps or anything super critical. You're going to melt your fucking car down. I'm electric. I'll just show you how incredible this is. Remember, Tefsel's just the wire alone is way better than the normal stuff, but actually it looks pretty decent. But when you compare it to my other 10 gauge, you're like, oh wow, that's way smaller. But then you actually look at the wiring on the other 10 gauge. So look at how much of that is just wire. This looks amazing. Like, oh my God, that's car audio stuff or whatever I got from Amazon 3 years ago. Oh. It's cut on an angle, but look at how small straight on. This is actually 12 gauge. See, they're almost identical. And this is crap 12 gauge from like AutoZone. I was disappointed when I realized what I was getting. So it's closer to 12 gauge. That alone would overheat planning appropriately. Going back to this again, it looks smaller than those, and yet way more wires, way more wire density. And this is also very expensive, you know, comparatively, but burning your car down is even more expensive. These actually need to potentially reach around. So why 3 of these instead of 4 when that is 4 pins? Well, I am optimizing this, is that one of these is actually for the water pump. If you look at how much the water pump maxes out at, peak consistent amperage, like 100%, which we do not run that thing at 100%, but 100% load is 33 amps, 32.9 amps. The current rating, continuous inside of a loom for Tefsel 10 gauge is 32.9. It's almost identical. So we can use one of these, even though I have 2 circuits, because these are only 25 amp circuits, so that the circuit can handle 50. I'll size them down so that way they don't put 50 amps through here, but we'll have a little splice right there, and there's no reason to run 2 of them. or the next size up is 8 gauge. That's gonna change the dynamic of everything. We're gonna use this actually for the main fan. One of these goes to the water pump. One of these goes to all the injectors. 16 injectors running all at once. Say each injector uses a minimum of 1 amp, maximum of 4 amps, but really like all at the same time isn't possible. Let's say 10,000 RPM or something like that. You're talking 25 to 35 amps on just the injectors. And those are high impedance, which means they don't take a lot of amperage. But one of those is, again, 33 amps. The circuit can handle that. Then water pump, and actually this is future proofing for either an air pump for the pneumatic shifting or something along those lines. So it allows us to use that. That's the core of the engine harness. So everything that goes to the Haltech is right there. That is it. That is 100%. Look at this. Look at how many pages of notes I have. I kept coming at this from different angles. That's the drive shafts. Different connectors. Here it is. There's the R5. There's the 4 connectors. And I was like, okay, well, I'll have it go to the engine, injectors, electronic wastegates. We need to get power to the spark, pedals, center console, front power. That will be the water pump. Front data, that'll be wheel speed sensors and so on. Rear power, that'll be fuel pumps. That'll be the Altezza, the all-wheel drive pump. And then rear data, that's, again, rear wheel speed sensors. That'll be the strain gauge, all that goes down the rear of it. I kept going further, and this is over the top of the engine. Then this is the whole rear harness. So this is everything that's going to be on the rear of the car. And that will all be condensed down to 2 plugs that will connect to all of this. The sad part is, as we keep going, okay, here's some splits that are going to have to happen. Here's some pedals. Here's where the main power, battery power. And I started saying, well, how am I going to get the Haltech? This is the same kind of concept, but now I'm starting to draw it out because we're going to have the power, the PDM, powering the fans, so front power, powering the fuel pumps, rear power, powering windows and sunroof and lights and other things like that. It's going to do a lot of things, including powering the ignition, so that we won't have any manual fuses in this car. And so then I was like, well, shit, here's the ECU. This is where you can see from earlier in the video, I was going to go one way with all the engine stuff and one way with all the car stuff. Honestly, you could still do it. It would actually look way smaller than you think, I thought. But there's the ignition, there's all the other connectors. And then I started getting further with that. Here's my PDM, my new one possibly coming in. Ignition, pumps, Altezza pumps, headlights. And so I started mapping it out even more. And this is where I started getting to this, saying, okay, well, at the end of the day, that's cool and all, but these 4, 5 have to all go somewhere. And I spent 3 hours in the Haltech software organizing. This pin goes to this one because you can reassign them. It's so impressive. So all the pinning I redid, and then here's where we are now. I said, okay, you know what? I'm gonna sit here just remaking plans. Let's just start cutting some wire. Unwritten page. This is the next step of all of our lives. You can fill it in with anything you want. You know, the rest is still unwritten. Natasha taught me that back in the early 2000s. What we need to do now is put them all all of these together. These are on that separate connector. Why tie them in? And this is well within the range of all of these DR25 boots and all that. This is, look at that. That is so insane. Of course, we'll probably have it center around these 3. Look at that. That's the whole engine and car as it pertains to this thing. That's incredible. Like, I'm gonna go cry as soon as Joel turns off the camera, trying to hold it together. This has taken many hours of planning and, of course, experience in the past. If you start doing a harness, use mine as inspiration, but it's not going to look like this the first time held. My 17th time doesn't look like this. This isn't my first rodeo, and this is from a guy who's at his second rodeo. That's me. The wire combination is what I will have coming out to here, and then there'll be some splits, some sensor ground splits, some signal ground splits, some jacketing, some zigzags and left rights, and then that's where it'll split off into the different harnesses from there. So then ideally, I'll start making the split somewhere in here, start zip tying them off. I ran out of zip ties. Start zip tying them all off and figure out what looks best. This is the biggest, most insane undertaking of my life. Obviously, the 4-rotor itself is the parent issue with that, but wiring this car is going to prove to be one of the most complex tasks ever taken on by a man like me, who lacks most skill in this sort of stuff, or at least experience. I have already begun some of the harder parts, and we'll cover this after. So I just want to show you guys more of the end result first. This is the harness, the core of the harness for the car. It's about to get way more complicated, but it is over 100 wires, and this is going to plug into the Nexus R5. That name is so appropriate. Nexus is, basically the center of something, and it is the nexus of my car. So it is power and ECU. But we're gonna also need another power box, and we got that coming in. So we're gonna have 2 boxes, which run the entire car. So imagine the switchboard insanity of having all those wires come together and then go out to different parts of the car. Powering fans, running the injectors, going in and having taillights work. The whole car is going through here. So I want to show you where it's going to then say, that's not where you start. The way I started this whole process was actually, I started talking about the engine. Now I've already wired the engine before, and obviously it's sitting right here for this reason. I have broken up things into manageable, doable tasks. You see the injectors, we've already done all those, but I'm now gonna make a harness that goes from the back of the motor and does all of the sensors, does the drive-by-wire, does the trigger wheel speed sensor, measures the amount of pressure and temperature in the oil pan, has the ability to help control the alternator, has all of the wideband and back pressure sensors. It's all built into the harness we're about to make. Starting simple, starting from a place where you can make sense and not want to die, try to start somewhere that might cost you a couple bucks. The fact is, what we're going to do is do something where we plan on cutting back. We're gonna have a little bit of waste, and that little bit of waste might be $50, might be $20, might be $10. But that waste makes this whole process so much easier. So let's take a look at the core ingredients to making this harness. And Joel just pointed out this hair, and you know what this hair is? It's a week of sleeping 4 hours a day, night, in the morning, or whatever. It's the mad scientist coming out when you're building wiring harness. I would almost argue to trust a person that looks like this to tell you about building wiring harnesses than some guy that seems super calm, collect, and looks like they had a good night of sleep. So this is my credentials right here. First place to start, as you guys know, I love working with ProWire. I've used Race Service, I've used a lot of other guys, but ProWire, they ship like the next day. It's insane, absolutely insane. And so I ordered enough wire to basically do this harness. And so I'll give you guys kind of an estimate of costs at this point, but what you're seeing here is a bunch of 22 gauge wire. That's these right here. You can run all of the small stuff on these baby wires, and you will be blown away at how this Tefsel wire, being so small, makes your harness so small. So we've got a couple different colors of those. Tefsel is annoyingly complicated name, but then the easy part right here is that's 16 gauge. Should be, no, just kidding, see? It's 20 gauge. So you see the 22 gauge right here, 22 gauge right there, 22 gauge, 22 gauge. The 9 denotes the color, 4 denotes the color, you get the theme there. The different colors make a step of the process much easier, is that I tend to use, and the industry kind of tends to use white as sensors. So this is almost an input on the computer. You're never really sending information out with these, you're always taking information into the computer. When you have a white wire, it makes it easier to go, okay, well all the white wires go to this, and I'm less likely to blow anything up, making a mistake. If you start sending power through things, you could have problems. So that's the next colors. These are generally used for sending power signals. Yellow is a very common one for like actuators. It's not so common to see it in this small wiring, but there's a couple of PDM signals I'm gonna be sending out, and I tend to use different colors for all those. Black, of course, ground. Red, clearly to me, is power, and red and white, because you have two types of power on the car. You're gonna have the 12 volts from the battery system, from your ECU, from whatever, it gives you 12 volts, but then you're gonna have 5 volts always from the ECU for pressure sensors, other types of turbo speed sensors. A lot of these 5 and 12 volts, you don't want to mix them up. So that's a pretty easy way. They're both red. Like I said, black, white is, you see how many sensor wires I've been using. Green and blue, to me, are sometimes interchangeable as a color, but those, to me, tend to denote things that ground out. So that wire is going to ground to do its thing. It is an output, but like all the injectors tend to be the blue wires, and that to me means, you know what, it's sitting there floating, and then when it wants to fire off the injector, boom, it hits ground, and the injector pulses. Now, the thing about an injector, if you, you guys, real quick refresher, injectors require you to run a power line to them, and then the ECU grounds them out to do their business. So that wire is not sending 12 volts. That's why I tend to use yellow for something that's going to send 12 or 5 volts of power, not this type of power, but signal power to get the work done. So whatever color I'm going to use, I finally got blue. I use the other color as like a filler wire. When you see a green wire in my harness, I know that that wire is a spare. And why do I have spare wires in there? To make the harness as even and consistently looking as possible, because my God, if you're gonna spend all this money on them, might as well make it look the part. Because if you look at what I get roasted for is how bad the harnesses look, even though they work 100% of the time, it's the visual appearance that makes a big difference. And it also adds to the cost. The visual appearance, of course, we're gonna be using DR25. These are all my raw rolls I bought in a kit a while back, except for these, because I started blowing through these. It's twice as big as the size you're reading. So this is 3/4 inch diameter when it's recovered, when it's shrunk down, it's heated up. And so this is 1/8 inch, so this shrinks down to 1/8 inch in diameter. So it's much larger than that. So it's a 1/4 inch thick right now. You're gonna be using all these different DR25s. This is very expensive compared to the 3M, but if you take a look at the harness that was in the 4-rotor, let's take a look at how rough the 3M ends up being after a 1.5 years of being in place. So this right here is what you saw make all that power and race the unicorn, right? Look at how rough this stuff is when you bunch it up. Nothing's wrong, but it looks like it's about to like rip apart. And that is just how that 3M stuff ages. At the end of the day, this whole harness is protected. It looks great from a cheap, a budget standpoint. This 4-rotor deserves much better. So this is kind of taking this level of a harness and going up a notch. Now you'll even see, one of the things I made a mistake on this harness years ago was I forgot to add 12 volts to it. And so you can actually see extra layers of crap. It's still protected, but it just wasn't planned out properly. That's the harness there, but we get to make some major improvements on that. I just wanted to show you guys what the 3M looks like after 2 years. It's not that pretty. And the DR25 looks, on my Indy car, which is a 1997 car, it still looks almost brand new. It's a big difference. So this story is going to get more and more expensive as you go and more worth it as you go. So you've got all these wires, you got them protected by a DR25, but at the very end of the wire, it's open. So you can get salt water in there, gasoline, oils, they will all find their way. They wick onto the wire and you will compromise your harness. This is where it gets really expensive, and yeah, at the same time, the most beautiful finish of these are TE Automotive Boots. So these are, same thing, it's still heat shrink. On these, they're more hard and they've recovered to a specific shape. Most of them recovered to a 180 shape, so it's just a straight boot. And then the others will do a 90 degrees. Now, look at these again. These little boots right here. This is a 202A111, because I'm gonna forget which ones I use on some of these things. But between using epoxy and these boots, that wire cannot be compromised. And when you pull on it, you can pull on the boot. It gives you more surface area to pull. You can't break the wire inside of there. It is just a night and day difference. And so there's the little blue thing inside of there to prevent oils and stuff to going into the injector. So from end to end, you have a waterproof, oil-proof, fuel-proof setup. And that, for the 4-rotor, is hypercritical because we're gonna do salt flat things. We're gonna do all these different things, and that will destroy a wiring harness sooner than later. The boots, that takes a lot of experience and planning to get used to them, or at least ordering a couple of them and realizing, okay, what these are. But I'm gonna try and give you guys a quick up to speed on all of that, so that way you know, okay, you know what, here's the general rule of thumb for those boots, here's what it takes to get those boots. So it's gonna be a kind of a crash course on how to build utterly insane harness for this car. If you thought that that was the end of all the expenses, I'm sorry. This is the most expensive and ultimate alpha omega part of the engine harness, or any harness that I'm gonna be doing from now on. These themselves are expensive. The tools used to make them are expensive. These are what people colloquially call Mil-Spec Connectors. That is actually not the name of them. You'll still hear me call it Mil-Spec because it's just a quick way of referencing things. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it is an auto sport connector. It's the same company, Deutsch makes these auto sport connectors, and they're made out of aluminum, and they are phenomenal. First of all, they're actually meant with this back part right here, all the wires going to this back part, they're meant to work with those boots. The boots hook onto here. That's a no-slip grip thing, and you'll use that epoxy, and you've got this beautiful connector that is bulletproof, almost, boot that keeps all the wires and weird shit going on behind it all in place. So these, typically, you buy them one side at a time. So this side, you see I bought 3 of them for this side, that's it. You don't get the other side. So they come with the pins, but this is anywhere from $40 all the way up to $100 for one side. It gets crazy. So the larger ones, like this one right here, is, of course, the bigger they are, the more expensive they are. But this one is used for things that are carrying power. These are all 16 gauge wires. And this is, for example, is actually gonna be the one that goes onto my ignition harness. I'm going a little overkill, just doing things that normal engines don't do. So I wanna make sure that the wiring is never the limit. On most harnesses, you can actually downscale. You can actually kind of get away with certain things on wiring size. So you can undersize the wires a lot. A lot of people actually, for data sensors and stuff like this is 22 gauge. This is the smallest I feel comfortable using, but there are a lot of these connectors that are for 24 and 26 gauge wires. Those are like hair. You know, the weight, the size, the packaging, all those things are IndyCar, like current F1 sort of stuff. You go really small because even the connector is less weight. So this connector right here is called a 1035. And so the way that these connectors work, and this is a crash course on these connectors as well, these connectors have a body size. That is this 10. So we'll ignore these numbers for a second, and we'll ignore everything else. This, all 10s, without looking at the pins, are this size. So if you're looking for this size, which you're not, but if you're looking for this size, it's a 10. The 35 denotes the pin configuration. S and N, ignore that. So 1035, this is a 1035. So there's going to be that number of these pins going through this body. That's when you're like, oh, you know, I'm going to use a 1035 here, or, you know, there's a 1097. Often the number, this part will actually equal the number of pins on there. That's a coincidence. This is a 22, and it's a 21. So it's a 22 size body. And this one actually does have 21 pins. Some of them do. This clearly doesn't have 31 pins or 35 pins. You can't trust it completely. Basically, for each of these body sizes, you look at like, you know what, let me see if I can get away with it. The smallest body possible, a 10. And then you see there's almost always like 3 configurations. That's it. 10, like a body size and then 3 configurations. So you'd be like, you know what, I need this to be a data one. Let me get tons of 22 gauge pins in there, and that'll be slightly different. That's the whole magic to them. It starts to get a little bit more confusing when you start looking at, see, like this AS stands for auto sport, so you can ignore that already. This 6 stands for the fact that this is this side of the connector. So on this AS0, the 0 means that it's this flange style. And then there's another style. There's the 6, the 0, and then the 1. And the 1 is basically this without a flange. So you always have to make a 6 work with a 0 or a 1. One side has to lock in. The 6 always has this locking ring. And then the 1 or the 0 have the other side. And then the last ones, before you guys get too crazy about all this, S stands for socket. So this is meant to have what we would call the female socket, not meant to be a sexist term, but the female socket, where the P stands for penis, stands for pin, and so the pin goes inside of the socket. The thing that gets really, really, really confusing, this is a major note about this, the thing that gets really confusing is you can buy this with sockets, you can buy this with pins, and as you probably can make sense of it, you cannot have 2 pins touch together. And that you can in real life. That's completely okay lifestyle. But on a wiring harness, the S and the P have to make love together. You have to have one side be the S and one side be the P. And there'll be weird outages of like certain things in stock and certain things not in stock. But you have to have one side be the socket, one side be the pin. That can make it really hard to order these, especially when you're first starting out. You've got all of your equipment, which is nice to have spares for me right now. I just ordered a bunch of it. You actually start here. And I do it by hand as I'm saying, you know what, the computer is going to probably have to talk to all these different things. I'm like, what sensors do I want to have on the car? I'm doing all these different like checklists of just what do I want the car to do? And then you see some scratch of like ideas as they're kind of coming together, the front of the car, the back of the car, what do I want to plug into those? And then I start looking at the engine. I can look at it and it's a lot easier to visualize. Clearly we're going to need this. We're going to switch this to drive-by-wire, as we introduced earlier. I want to have the temperature of the coolant going in and the temperature of the coolant going out. I want to have the pressure and temperature of the air, pressure and temperature of the oil, pressure and temperature of the fuel. You see where this is going. It's really easy when you're seeing the engine or if you've worked on that engine multiple times in a row, especially if you've built a shit harness of that engine. It's always worth spending whatever, $50 in wire to make a shit version to make a good one. That's all I did, is that this is literally the engine sitting down like this from the top. And I see that, you know what, I'm going to keep all these sensors back here. Up here, I want to have the drive-by-wire. I want to have my coolant. I want to have the crank angle sensor. I want to have the turbo speed. I want to have my wastegates. You just see all this coming together. So that then makes your checklist for this. What are those? This is going to start forming into the wires. Like how many wires are you going to need? And look at this. See these numbers up here? I'm already starting, at this point, I'm trying to figure out what type of connector am I going to use for this. So in this case, I made all this and counted them. And I was like, oh, well, I need at least 30 22 gauge wires. The 1435, 14 body, 35 style, has 37 22 pin. So boom, I have spares. I can run extra things if I wanted to. 8 hours total to get to this point. So And that's 8 hours of working. That's not 8 hours of one day. That's a couple hours of writing this down, replanning it, seeing what sensors I wanted, and then basically be able to sign off, like as if it was a job. I also had the same thing for the wastegates, because I'm like, well, there's a lot of power going to this, and I don't want that going through the same connector. Once you've got that done, now you take out your yardstick, tape measure, or whatever, and start figuring out the lengths of each of those runs. And of course, you're slightly overestimating. When you're measuring the drive-by-wire, and the wire starts right here, do not measure from here to here. Don't do that. Measure it at a 90-degree angle. Measure it so that way the wire goes straight out and then up. You're gonna end up with a little bit more wire, and that's realistically, when you go to zip tie this to something, you're not gonna ever go straight point to point. Keep that in mind when measuring the wire's lengths. Even then, I still overestimate about 10% on purpose, 10% more than the most I think I'll need. And then when I go to cut the wires, which is our next step, I make them 20% longer than that. And the reason for the 20% longer, to overestimate again, and B, to make sure that I have enough wire when the wire twists. When you have a wire go from end to end, it's like this. But when you have a wire in a Mil-Spec or Auto Sport harness, the length shortens. This is, of course, exaggerated, but that's the idea, is that it takes up to 20% more wire to go the same distance. And for those of you guys thinking about it, it does technically make the harness bulkier, because in fact, instead of having this much wire, you have this much wire in the same amount of space, but it's much less bulky because this concentric twisting makes it all super refined. So it actually ends up always being a smaller, thinner harness, even though technically there's more wire being used in the same distance. This becomes almost our to-do list. If you buy the HP Academy's wiring guide, they will go through such a more thorough process, and that's, of course, if you're building customer engines or whatever the case is, I would say from a legal standpoint, that is the correct way to do it. I do kind of skip around a little bit. Right now, what we're gonna do is start making these wire lengths, that entire length. And it really becomes this easy. You say, you know what? I know that I have the engine coolant temperature sensor. It's gonna be 8 inches plus 12 inches plus 10 inches, add 20%, and we're literally gonna go to the wall and cut that length. So this is where I'm gonna deviate from HP Academy completely. They're very methodical and proper, but what I'm gonna do is take the greatest length of all of these sensors and wires and make all of them that same length. And then I'm gonna take the greatest length out of all of these, which is this 20 inch here, and make all these are 10 inch, I'm gonna make all of them 20. And here's why. I now can cut all of these length of wires from here to each of these, and I now know I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, whatever, 6 of the exact same wire. And then these are all whatever, same thing, let's say 7. So when I go to make the harness, I can rapidly make the harness instead of saying, okay, well, this wire is exactly 4 inches smaller than this one, and you put it into a Ziploc bag, and you list the Ziploc bag, and then you go and grab one of 100 Ziploc bags, and you go, okay, well, this one's engine coolant, and you're like, okay, shit, I need to make sure that spins around this just right, and I need to make sure it's in the right spot. It's way easier for me to just say, okay, let's put all the white wires in there, have all the shorter ones drop off here, have all the longer ones go to the end and split at this point. And then you can just pick the ones when you look at your twist, which you do still plan. I still have the plan of which one is in what order. But you just go, okay, well, let me just grab that one. Maybe it didn't go exactly as I planned, and we'll take this white wire, make it go to whatever, this. Just a lot easier to make the harness quicker. You lose money. Now that we got a 20-inch one here, there's a 10-inch one here. We're gonna waste 10 inches, 20 inches, 24 inches. Let's say we wasted 3 feet of Tefsel wiring. How much is that? Well, Tefsel wiring is around 20 to 30 cents a foot for 22 gauge. So you're talking, we just wasted $1, maybe $2 at most of wire for that simplicity. That's what I would argue. You can use those shorter wires sometimes for other things, but your time, how much is your time worth? If it's not worth a lot, then don't do this. But if you guys think that it's being completely just that quick, here's what the 8 hours of planning bought me. I filled in what I wanted the sensor to look like and what all wires are going to be in what order to kind of keep things away from each other and close to each other, and ones that are going longer stay closer to the center of this wire. This is another one for the E-gates. I then went and listed out all of the sub things, so everything else that's connecting to something else, not just a sensor, which is this next one. Each sensor, where it's going, what color the wire, all of this is 100% written for this harness. So this is actually the planning step. All the splices, where I'm gonna put the splice, you're gonna have one 5-volt wire, that red-white wire, and it's gonna split off to tons of pressure sensors, and of course the black wires for all the sensor grounds. And then I ultimately did this where I know what I'm gonna put in what layer. I just want you guys to see that this is where I planned ahead and actually have some logic to what I'm doing. All of this is 100% accurate for this car, and then I ended up making up the list of all the things I would for sure need. So this is the center of the harness, and it is the biggest game changer for me, because the center of my old harnesses, this is what I've been using, and even though there are a larger number of wires in there, it's still the same concept as this. It's shielded, and it's got reasonable sized wires. Anyway, look at the size difference. This is amazing. This is what I would use in any harness that wasn't mil-spec, or I'm just trying to keep the cost down. This stuff's excellent, but look at how much smaller our harness gets because of this. So this will go straight through the motor, and I will be having a connector, because I'm going to be having this come through here, hide, and then come to right here. So this will actually connect down into a connector for this one. Traditionally, I run them, end-to-end ECU to this, but we're actually going to be using an Autosport connector right here to make sure that when we take the front cover off, or we try to get to this because the connector can't fit through this easily, it just stays with this stuff and it doesn't mess the whole harness up. We can actually just disconnect this and the whole harness can be pulled off. Let's remeasure it because we make sure my numbers are good. My overestimation is a little too much, and that's why we're testing this wire out. So that gives me a little pigtail to connect it to the firewall, and then that gives me that. Now this wire is not twisting much because it's the very center of the harness, so this will get much longer. I am going to add a little bit more, and then we'll measure it again just to see if that feels right. It takes a little bit of work to get used to your measurements. So 36, that's 3 feet plus another 1.5 feet. This is 52 inches, so my wires all being 60 inches isn't unreasonable. It's an extra couple inches for safety and security, but okay, so that's this. This is the kind of fun part here, that was this wire, which is 22 gauge. 2 wires inside that. We're going to use this 20 gauge wire for a totally different reason. So this, I have it shielded, and this is a personal thing. Some people might laugh or whatever, but you get why I'm doing it. This is going to control the power lines for the drive-by-wire. This can use typically 1 amp of drive-by-wire, but it can use up to a couple amps. And I don't want the fact that this is constantly fighting the air, it's constantly reacting to my pedal, it's constantly reacting to the ECU. I do not want this thing bursting with electricity through my whole core of my harness, so I have it shielded. But on the 3-rotor, quite frankly, I just run 2 wires. It's right through the center of the harness. Same concept. We're going to make this almost exactly length, okay? This is going to make the core of my harness. I wanted the drive-by-wire to look like this, partially because I wanted the center of the harness to be 2 of these. And what we're about to do is going to require some more tools, not expensive ones, to take this next step. So we're going to make these try and stick together. They're all lumpy, and here's what happens when you have lumpy wire. The wires are twisting inside of your twisting, so you get this weird kind of look to it. This won't be so bad, but there is a way to make this behave, and it's going to require vices, and it's also going to require Kevlar, like bulletproof vest Kevlar. I think you could probably use dental floss in an absolute pinch, like unflavored probably, or maybe mint. Just kidding. But this is dental floss looking stuff, but it's made out of Kevlar, so it's very strong. And we're going to be using this, because we see a lot of professionals doing it, to keep these keep them in their lane. And so once they're all twisted, they're going to get all lumpy and weird, and I don't want them to do that. So we're going to wrap, say we twist them this way, we're going to wrap the Kevlar the opposite way, so it kind of forces them to stay well behaved. See me with all my sick Caltech stuff. This is actually going to go behind the dash. This is actually part of my entire harness for splitting out to the dash, EGTs, and other, the buttons. So here's the EGT module. That's going to plug into this. I might remake that cable, may not. The buttons, as you guessed, they plug into that as well. So that's not my harness. That's a separate harness, but it connects to my harness. I went and tried 2 different ones of these, but it really comes in helpful to use a vise. And so I bought these off of Amazon. Nothing crazy. This is a vacuum base for it. It's pulling such a strong vacuum. It snapped back because it was under such tension. And so then this little top part, they look kind of cheapy, and they are kind of cheapy. Obviously, this gives us a lot of positioning ability, and these are made out of kind of a hard plastic. As you can tell, I need 2. So I'm gonna try this one as well. Similar but different. The height difference kind of sucks, but these have even softer rubber gloves. It comes with them. This whole thing all together. Bessie, kind of looking like the cheaper, better option. These are nice, but that's really nice. Okay, so what we're gonna do is hold these in the vise, and we're gonna use the next friend that you think you can use anything else and you're wrong. Kapton tape. This comes in super handy. It's very silky on the outside. It can withstand the temperatures that a harness may withstand. A mid-level construction piece to this. Hold these in place. So we are going to take one of them. I guess we take both of them. And so we're looking at how they're twisted. And they're both twisted the same way. The reason I went with this drive-by-wire is I was going back and forth. I'm like, you know what? All of my sensor wires are now super small. And the drive-by-wire is going to be even more beastly because of the size of the drive-by-wire. And the airflow against it, that's going to require more force. So I just want that hidden away from the rest of the harness. And I kind of like this with these heads, is that you can kind of bend them back to get that extra bit of tension on them, on the things that you're tightening down. So you can kind of see that it kind of sucks. So these wires are twisting this way. So that means the next layer is actually going to twist where they're crossing over. It kind of does an opposite corkscrew. So that means that when we go to do the next layer, it tries to kind of smooth the previous layer out. And that's really what it does. When you go the opposite way, it kind of makes it more consistently. Instead, if we keep going the same way, some of the wires are going to fall inside here. So some wires, it's going to like suck in some sections that they're not. It's a pain. Okay, so when you're looking at this, you're trying to figure out what's the widest it can be. So 0.24 inches. And then you also look at what the thinnest it can be to help kind of figure out an average. 0.12. Mix the two together. I'm going to say about 0.21 on average as the thing's kind of going across. And that helps me figure out what the next layer of wires, how many to include in there. But before we do that, we're going to use that Kevlar to hold this in and try and make those valleys and peaks a little less noticeable. At this point, we have to look back at our document and go, okay, well, you know what? There's no reason to put this Kevlar tape after the point of which they split. So we kind of have to start drawing some lines in the sand and looking at our splits. And so we have two major splits. One when it gets to the engine and it goes to all the back sensors, and one when all the front sensors split. And so I've purposely put the split I gave excess on this end and excess wire on this end. So that way the wire harness actually technically starts somewhere in here and it ends somewhere in here. So that way both ends, if I misestimated, not a big deal. And it's easier to hold these when everything else is kind of shorter than that. Just say right at the 36-inch mark right here. I'm just putting this here just to extra for visual reference, because I'll start wrapping things and just lose track of time. We'll take the Kevlar and get it right to about here, and then put Kapton tape right where the split would be. Same thing on this end. Is I took the adhesive off of this end, and that's where we're going to start this stuff. So this is a new one for me. The concept makes perfect sense. One of the biggest reasons for this and advantages is that you can make your harness. Yeah, I feel it.
Whoa.
Yeah, you can make your harness more flexible because you're using less tape, which it's going to hold onto these wires. You can use less tape along the harness, and this stuff's still holding it in instead of like tape, or anything like that. We are going to go across them like this. Stick it right there. This layer of Kapton will actually be somewhat permanent. Actually, not cut that Kevlar. You see, it really adds like no weight and no like space to the harness. This is very impressive. We have to test how the harness like flexes between this section and this section with this stuff on there. Okay, so that seems not the most even. Okay, so that's the beginning of the first split. So the idea is that while this is bending around, oh my god, it handles so much better. Concentric twisting on wires like this gets you so far, but look at this. That stuff's actually holding it. You would have seen them starting to break apart. I went a little bit tighter on the looping here. That's pretty exciting. That is very exciting. Now to compare that, you'll start to see them, no matter what, you'll start to see them like break open and just do weird things, and so it's not as nice. So that is my first time using Kevlar, and I am very happy because it makes the next couple steps so much easier, especially when you're trying to juggle all those wires and you're blowing through 200 zip ties. This prevents you from having to do that when you go from the next layer to the following layer. So the next step I'm doing is more of a mental, probably easier to draw it out down here, but this is a temporary zip tie because this section right here and here are where the front split to all the sensors in the front of the motor, and then the rear split, and they will split after this. The actual everything is right back here. So this whole section is definitely guaranteed under the motor. And then from here to here is actually the shortest distance I know that the pigtail will be. If we're going to cut this here or cut this here based on how far it is from the back of the motor to the ECU connector, if we leave it right here and cut right here, of course everything's going to unwind. So I'm doing the shortest distance possible, expecting that we may cut it to here and be good. We know that the wire combination from here to here is going to be one thing, and then it's going to change from here to here because those wires start splitting out. What we can do is start cutting all of the wires for the next row, or really all of the wires in general, doesn't really matter, and either start doing this section and then have them just all sit here, start doing this section, and then have the rest of them sit here. So the next row, which I have documented in that whole document, really gives us our next layer. I think based on the thickness of this, we should be able to fit 15 wires. By God, we're going to try that. So we're on to level 2 of the harness, and that's really everything that's coming from the ECU, 100%. Each of those simple single wires before things split off or anything like that, that's the first section. And so this is going to get out of control real quick, especially considering you see how much wire I have left. And take this back to our harness and see if this is long enough. If it's long enough, is it too long? Clearly long enough, plus that extra bit. Sadly, it seems like that is the necessity for making this harness safely. So that extra bit, it'll be kind of fun to see. So you see how far this is right now? Watch how much that shrinks when we actually do the concentric twisting. It won't be gone, it won't be like this, but it actually does take a good percentage of that excess harness. So we're gonna get 14 of these wires, and that should be the correct number of wires, and we'll adjust the harness accordingly, but this should be the correct number of wires to get a nice clean and tight look all the way around the bottom layer. The bottom layer being these peaks and valleys makes it really hard to know and to guess that. So I've estimated it, but if it's 15, if it's 13, we're still in good business and we'll adjust the document as we go. Regardless, we need 15 wires for what I'm doing either way. So we'll get those all together. There's all 15 of the sensors that I know I need in this harness, and hopefully this layer wants 15. I have a feeling that this is slightly different tefsel, so there are two types. I'll show you side by side. This is the 16, and so 16, dash 16 tefsel has actually more plastic, so more, well, tefsel, ETFE, and so that's going to increase the size of the diameter without changing the properties of the metal inside of it. I actually measured the 30-32, which has a smaller jacket, when I was making my calculations, so you gotta be careful when you do stuff like that. And it even says that, even on this, it'll tell you dash 16. Yeah, this is 16, and the 32. The bigger number is smaller, thinner wire. We're gonna run it the same direction as the Kevlar underneath it, and we're kind of doing like a blanket sort of thing. We'll just hopefully this isn't so much that it bunches up. That's a no-go for this, and we'll pull a wire or two out. This thicker jacket actually makes it easier and more predictable to work with. So let's see if this makes this a little bit easier given the crap that's underneath. It almost makes me feel like we could add a wire or two.
Wow.
Yeah, you see that? It's gonna be a tough one, but that's the problem, is that on the bigger parts, it's gonna be split apart, and then when it gets thinner, it's gonna be much closer together. What's really nice about this dash 16 tefsel wires is that the jacket's super slippery and kind of more firm, so it makes it easier to handle these wires. Like, they're slipping all over in a great way. Normally the smaller ones would bunch up. Oh no, that's not a good sign.
Lost one?
Lost one.
To begin with, sure.
Yeah. Well,
because we're running 14.
yeah. Well, you know what? As long as we see a split all the way across the whole thing, 15 might work. This is going to take a lot of massaging and whatnot, and I'll keep working on it. I have now gotten the wire wrapped around the way I wanted it to, and then I realized, got film, I realized we were going to do the Kevlar from here over. The reason I'm starting from here, this is the rear split, and then I'm going to go over about 8 inches. Just make that little section, put the tape again right here, carry it out to here just in case, but knowing that I'll probably cut it back to somewhere in here. So we got a little core section done. So this is level 2. Layer 2. With the lumpiness underneath it, you can see a little bit here and there of like, okay, I could have maybe used one less wire, but at the same time it creates this nice layer, and so this will certainly help big time, the Kevlar, on preventing that weirdness that you're seeing from acting up. I'm just gonna have it run all the way back. inches, and this is the minimum length of the pigtail. Oh, that's nice. Actually, we'll take the harness out to show you exactly why this matters so much. That would have started binding up big time.
Wow.
Yeah, you know, even when I'm making the harnesses, you start putting tons of zip ties there to hold them together. These are all the wires actually being used for the wideband O2 sensor, and it looks like there's a lot more, but I'm actually using smaller wires because I was going to have to run filler wires or run thicker wires for it. And so I'm like, well, if I make the wires thinner, I can use 2 for the wideband power and negative power, and then that just helps my harness look more even and consistent. So you're going to start doing a lot of things like that as you get comfortable, and you're like, wow, this harness is going to look like shit. Even with all this work I'm doing to it, there's going to be a really lumpy wire there or here, and you kind of plan around that and do weird things to make it look good. Just so you guys know, halfway through this video, I realized Isaiah gave me the Rona, and I'm surviving, but he was pretty rough. So thankfully he's recovering, but I've been working on the harness, and I realized that Joel isn't here, as I was doing a lot with him filming, and I got that brain fog. But the good news is, because you are using kind of diagrams and documents, at this point, especially when you've done 2 or 3 harnesses, you can have brain fog and still get the harness done. This is actually a pretty autonomous process, really. At this point, it's going to look way further than it was, but it really is simple steps. So in this case, this is the 3rd layer I put on there, and all these little green wires, those wires are just simply filler wires. So it's just to make it look pretty. And that whole outer layer is done for here. And then all I did, I took the 2 lines from the sensor ground and then the power, 5 volts, and made a little crimp and then put some sticky heat shrink on top of that. And so I made sure that they all break off right at the right spot. I'm pretty happy with this. So all of these wires, I actually kind of them organized. These are all for the wideband. I doubled up on the power and the ground because they're only 22 gauge. And then these go to various pressure and temperature sensors and combined sensors for fuel, oil, and air. Those are all breaking off right there. And I think what's going to happen is I'm going to make a T shape just like that. And we're going to get to a point where I can measure, it's almost right now, where we can measure the diameter of all this and know what type of boot to get. So there's going to be a lot of times where you're going to get halfway through the harness and I don't know a boot. I'm not going to keep boots on stock because they're like 20 bucks a piece. I'm going to measure it and then order it in. So you're not going to finish the harness immediately. So same thing around here is I just kept going and I was just putting all the white wires that are for sensors. They reorganized really nice. Honestly, like HP Academy has this whole like plan and all that sort of stuff, and it works. But for Tefsel wiring, look at how tight that is. So clean. And reorganizing the wires inside here is very much not difficult compared to traditional thick wires. You're seeing that it broke off tons of sensor grounds and 5 volts, and including some 12 volts. This is the front split on the engine right here. So all of these are going to split off into different sensors. I was about to put the 2nd layer onto here of filler wires, and I realized, oh crap, I want you guys to see this. So, I've got the Kevlar tape wound it a little bit tighter, thanks to my buddy Kevin giving me some good advice on that, so that way it holds it even better. But I've really gotten minimalistic on how this thing's going to be held together, because that makes it more flexible. We're going to go up to here, I'm going to add those filler wires, and then you'll see tons of green. And we'll be right back. Well, there you go. There it is, all wrapped up, looking nice and pretty. I could have maybe added 1 more green wire. Nonetheless, very happy with how this turned out. So this section is pretty much done. And before I go any further, I'm going to figure out the diameter of this, do this one up to figure out the diameter of it as well. So that way we can figure out what boot this is and not go much further. These wires are so small and manageable. Normal wires, things start getting out of control really quick, and then you can't go back if you go too far. That kind of takes experience, a couple mess ups to figure that out. But overall, this should be really easy to boot and sleeve. Be completely prepared to have a brain fart, bad as I did, and realize that I had way too many wires over here and not enough wires over here. This is the greatest part about color coding the wires. These are all sensors. And I only had 2 out here. I grabbed the rest. I hooked my pinky and I grabbed the rest while I was doing the first round. And so I had 5 extras down. I pulled them down there. So when I did a quick check before I started going any further, I realized, wait a second. I'm supposed to have 7 sensors back here and 7 sensors up here. That isn't the case, which allowed me to do one thing. It allowed me to shrink this down to 1 layer on top of the outer layer. So unfortunately, those are all wasted. We can use them for later things, but fortunately, I shrunk the harness down 1 layer. And so right here is going to be all my splits to my different sensors. And that's the sort of shit that you want to make sure you watch out for and keep checking because obviously that's going to totally trash your harness. Before it looks like I get too far ahead of myself, all I did was I took them and kind of divvied them out, saying, okay, you know what, let me make sure that I have the right number of wires here. And so corresponding to that, I knew that, okay, all these wires go to the wideband O2 sensor, all these go to the back pressure sensor, and pressure sensors have a power source. This is my fuel pressure and temperature sensor, and those sharp-eyed guys will notice I'm not carrying an extra sensor ground. I bought, and I'm trying a Bosch combo sensor, so it cleans things up nice and easy. It makes the wiring easier, to be honest, but less ground splices, so that the pressure and temperature sensors are built into one. Same thing with my oil, and that's really why I did it, was the oil pressure and temperature sensor. Having two of them in there is just like chaos, and it's a dirty area. So one sensor, one connector, that really ties it and cleans it up nicely, especially in such a dirty area. And then these two, I could not do that. These are pressure and temperature sensors separate for the intake manifold, because the intake experiences vacuum, whereas these don't. You can find sensors that do vacuum, and they end up being like $2,000. They're stupidly expensive. I'll stick to the AEM pressure and temperature sensor combo. Also, on the temperature side, these are pretty fast reacting, but they're not like air temperature sensors with the exposed element. These take a couple seconds to react. These are much quicker, at least hopefully. No matter how much you plan and whatnot, it is best to go back to the surface or the place that you're going to measure from. And thankfully, because of all this tape and whatnot, this thing's beautifully flexible and pretty rigid. So first split is going to happen right back there, right as the manifold starts to hide it. And then the second split should be kind of middle back of that iron right there. The front split should be kind of in the back of that housing right there, giving me room to split and make it to here, to down here, and so on. So that really is looking great. Certainly the places I want to go. And then you can see this might be the shortest distance going up into there, and it could go as long as all these are. And so what I've done is bent these in a way they'll all kind of point up. I'm going to take this one. This is going to be the wideband oxygen sensor. So that's going to go down somewhere past the turbo, maybe somewhere in this area. So it doesn't need to be this long, but I want to overestimate. You don't want to overestimate, because then you're going to mess up your DR25, and that actually is not good. We're going to go ahead and look at the other ones that we know have to be a certain length. This one's a back pressure sensor, and we're going to mount that kind of in this area right here, run the metal line to it, and then there's going to be a fuel sensor, and then this is the sensor for that. Now, obviously we don't want it running onto the ignition, so we'll have some sort of distance. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all these to slightly over this length, and that way we just have less to deal with. Now that I am no longer dying to the COVID, I am ready to finish what we started. And I apologize if parts of those videos was a little all over the place, so it was my brain. Just to recap, we have the wiring harness meant to go from the very back of the motor to the firewall, going all the way to all the sensors on the back of the motor. So that includes even the yellow wires here are all for the wideband O2 sensor, as well as pressure and temperature sensors for oil, fuel, wideband, and of course back pressure sensors. And then going to the front, we have drive-by-wire, all of the drive-by-wire stuff there, pressure, temperature sensors. This is actually a pressure, temperature, 12 volts, anything. This is a modular part that we can add on and take away. This is currently going to be used for measuring the oil pan temperature and pressure. So that way I can see how much vacuum it's pulling and how hot the oil is getting out of the motor. And then of course, turbo speed. Finally, the one that's holding it all together, the core of the motor, the crank angle sensor. So that's all built into here. We have extra green wires here to make this nice and clean. And so what I'm going to do is cut it about back here. This is where I plan to have it kind of stop, but this is the connector, and I want the connector to have some room to work within here, because I have to splice some wires. The shields, both of these shields have to be dealt with, and because drive-by-wire is built into this one, it is not as thin as this wire. So I have to splice these and make those go to 2 pins each. I got some work to do here. So we're gonna cut it all the way back here. Hopefully that's good enough. I'm gonna go elect to use a straight boot with this. So I'm gonna go straight out. With this being the very back of the motor, the idea is that this could go up and plug into the wall of the car. I don't know how well that's going to work, but at least with the straight boot, I can kind of snake it up, down. But with the right-hand boot, the 90-degree one, I'm pretty stuck in a place. And so we're going to use all the 90-degree stuff on the inside of the car, because they're going to be coming out towards the driver, right? They're going to hook to the side and then go to the ECU and the power distribution module. Here's a very big moment for me. This is the first time I've done like a formal process with these Autosport connectors. They are sick, but they are very intense to work with. Ribbon cutting ceremony. I'm gonna go back a little bit more. It's probably gonna end up being somewhere in here. The center parts don't twist as much, so they're not as long. As soon as we unfurl these yellow wires, they're much longer. So I need the center parts to be longer, just in case. Oh. That is sadly a lot of wasted wire there. I can use those little bits for something. It's wasted in one sense. I needed that excess. Who knew how long this was gonna get? So now I can start working on the weirdness inside of here. This is the crank angle sensor and its shield. That's that little black wire right there. And then both crank angle sensor signals, which are not ground, by the way. On this ECU, it's nice to have them both individual wires. So they're really isolated from the rest of the harness. Once those go in there, it's kind of over. And I'm stuck with this length. And I finally started doing this where it's got some strain relief little circles on there. All a pain in the ass. Just gonna be honest with you guys, complete pain in the ass. But I am following my wiring diagram, so the very center pin on my diagram was actually this exact pin, and then the other two are those. So it looks really pretty at this angle, but it's just gonna be a rinse and repeat of cutting these down to the right length, crimping them, and then putting that little twist in it, and then pushing them in. And it's funny because they always include these little cheapy plastic things. They're perfect. They work exactly what you need. One side's for removing them, one side's for pushing them in. So we'll pop one of those in, push all three of those down, make sure that loop is far enough away where the pin can actually go all the way in it. It's my first time ever twisting these wires like this, and it is not kicking my ass, but it is a new experience, and I'm learning techniques as I go that really make it cleaner, overall safer for the harness. But at the end of the day, the cool part is it's got everything in there, and I'll max out this connector and I have all the spare sensors and everything else is all in here. One of the things I kind of am messing up on is I can't go this high. I shouldn't be going this high with these loops. This boot, this area here, is never going to be under the boot, so I already kind of messed up with how long I've made this. And so I've learned, but I'll make it better next time. But everything here is going to really get wrapped tight and held together. When you start from this side and go that way, this would not be a problem because you can just keep making the whole thing as tight as you want. To me, that requires years of experience. Very first time doing this, but without any sort of tape on there, it makes it look way worse than it is. I think this is the easiest way to explain why is it worth doing all of this. And I'll show you if you come from this angle right here. The whole harness gets pulled.
Whoa.
Yeah, it accordions a little bit. And it's that last line of defense from pulling the pins straight out of the socket. So that gives you a lot of control. It's going to be under a boot, and this is all going to be locked in place. But as you start moving this part of the wire, it's still going to put a little bit of tension on these. Of course, this is the actual flexible part of the harness right here. Anything under here is kind of meant to be stuck in place. But again, that last second pull, those are going to keep it safe. We're going to tape it up down to right where my fingertips are, and then cut a piece of DR25 from the very edge of this to right about here. I will improve on this as we go. This is also one of the most dense. This is 36 small pins all in one spot. But that really cleaned it up. So there's a little bulge, and that's because of the splits in there. All of that hides in underneath here. Even if I leave it completely full length, but I want to cut it right underneath that. So it'll get this to about right here. That works for me. Kind of got a little stiff. That's a little unfortunate. This whole section is going to be stiff because of the boot and the epoxy, but kind of affected this layer too. That's a new one for me. Even then, this harness is going to move quite a bit because this is actually 0.4 inches. It's just shy of 0.5. We're going to use 3/4 inch DR25, and we're going to go as far down as the 3/4 will go. We'll go as far to this edge right here. You can see that the DR25 is rather wide, and it almost looks like it would fit over this way, but it will not. What we will do though is we'll plan to have it go all the way up to the edge here. I think it'll probably get up in this area. This stuff's expensive. Yeah, it's all expensive, obviously, but DR25, as it gets thicker, becomes ridiculous. This looks so dinky. For it being, the 4 rotors harness, it looks like I'm missing tons of shit. It'll go to about right there. We'll do another round of taping the tip of this and this knurling kind of all together. That way the epoxy doesn't cover it. and cause problems. Point out what we're going to be doing with this, just to kind of give you guys a refresher, is that that's going to be sitting somewhere here, and then this has a little bit of excess to be able to articulate and go to the firewall wherever the car is going to deem it necessary. And if it's straight on, we can push this into the engine a little bit further. So this is 0.75 inches, which shrinks down to whatever, 3.85 or something like that. This is 3.9 or 4.0, so it'll just barely shrink onto it. And that's exactly what I want it to do, is be the biggest piece that goes onto that without question. Oh, wow. That is quite nice. Well, it will shrink down a little bit as we heat this up, but we're pretty much ready to do just that. Try not to use too much heat all at once. We're just gonna take every bit of recovering all the way to the end. That's gonna require going all the way around it properly because it's a little loose. I mean, it actually is meant exactly for that. Still a little warm, but look at that. That Raychem 3/4 inch DR25.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. All whatever 38. It's more than that because it splits all the other wires. This is like 35 or 37 wires, and then I split tons more. They're all happy moving through there. So this will be certainly great going from the engine to whatever it ends up going to. So now this boot doesn't look so extreme. Still not as small. Maybe I will use the whole boot like this. We are one step closer to making this harness a reality. And so I wanted to actually set up the tripod to make sure that you guys could see exactly what I do on this step. It's just kind of hard to wear a GoPro. It's kind of hard to do all those other things. I lose focus. So I just want this to really show you the intricacy of making this thing possible. So what we're gonna do in this step of the video, put this boot right here. We're actually gonna cut this down right by this lip right there, and we're gonna put that boot onto that whole section right there and glue it in, and then we're actually gonna glue and heat this one up as well, and then do the same thing with this area right here. I actually have a spare boot. It was off of a really long one. Surprisingly, heat shrinks down to that, so maybe I'll put that over there just to keep the aesthetics up. That means that we can finally heat shrink this part and really just get the core of the harness finished. You could do all of it at once, but I'm gonna actually use two of these tips. One for now, and then one when I go to glue all of the ends on here. The very first step I'm doing here is actually getting this boot ready for the adventure. I could use scissors, but I think I'm gonna use a razor blade to do that because I wanna make a nice clean score right over there. You can actually use the whole boot, but it gives you kind of this like ladder, like second level, just in case this was to be much longer, like it almost was. So let me trim that down. I'm gonna be a makeup artist right now and bust this out. Not that makeup artists do that, but the hand presentation. Then I'm gonna go ahead and cut this without cutting myself. That actually is a very thick part of the heat shrink. The rest of it's kind of much thinner. And I think this is a dull blade. But this one can now fit on like that. What we can do is actually glue both ends, the top side and the bottom side, and then heat it all up and shrink it all together. This one, on the other hand, really is ready to go. It looks like it's sticking out there, but that's just because the boot moves. That one's gonna be really fun. We'll just take the top off of this, twist it to lock it in. As it goes, it mixes the two epoxies. And our boot is ready for recovering. Let's see what happens. See if I guess the right boot size. That is wild. That boot's really, really impressive. It actually got longer as it went too. That was kind of funny. So there's my very first boot on the engine harness, and that thing is holding in nice and strong. It's clipped in on the top. It's warm. It's very warm. And it's sealed all the way down at the bottom here. So this one's very interesting. Pull it back just to show you what it is. It's gonna create a T, so top to bottom, and then this will go out And even though this looks weird, that's what that's gonna do. So I'm going to glue around this, so it's gonna stick all those wires in there. We're gonna take a step that is irreversible, and we're gonna begin to slide that over that. I'll start gluing these other parts too. The boot is definitely starting to become a T. That was gratifying. And it's starting to come together. I'm sorry for the camera work. This camera is struggling with the backlighting. The T part, I'm gonna fill that with more epoxy to make sure that these really get sealed between them. That is really cool how this boot just kind of came alive and teed off perfectly. I'm gonna pour more epoxy into that T. So this is about as good as I've gotten this. I'm gonna just turn off the camera and be able to focus on it. It is really hard to film wiring this level. I'm setting it up on both of these vices just to let it be easier for me to manage. I'm very proud of that one. This one was a whole new learning experience. Hopefully it responds properly. Okay, let's see how that treats us using one of their other boots to make this consistent. Otherwise, I'd leave it like this. Actually, a lot of the IndyCar ones are done like that. It's done by professionals this way too, but I like the idea of using boots on all of it. So I'm impressed at how fast these boots shrink. So experimenting with this last chunk of an old boot worked out perfectly. And I'm gonna make sure I continue to use the other scraps I have for this. These aren't like the best work at all, but they are very, very effective. So I am happy with that. Again, that was a scrap from an old boot on a different thing, and that's gonna create a nice little barrier. And of course, it's all stuck together now. The T-boot right here was a very new experience for me. I overglued it, but I also want visual confirmation that it's glued and definitely capable of, you know, having salt, oils, gas spill on it and not get into the wiring. So I am not upset with that, even though visually that's not the most ideal. And then I'm actually extremely pleased with this. Look at how this turned out. I'm very happy with this. The whole thing turned out really well. The boot, the stuffing, the way I did all the strain relief inside of there, it all turned out how I wanted it to. That harness has only just started drying, but I could not help it and compare it to where it's gonna be resting. Now with the engine in, you can see that that little pigtail is gonna go up and connect into a bulkhead connector right there on the firewall that does not exist. The back part of this will then distribute to all of these sensors and actuators in the back, and then it'll go up here and split right at the front, and then of course the intake manifold will do a really good job of concealing a lot of those splits. One will go to the turbo and the rest will go over to this side of the motor or the two temperature sensors right there. It's just gonna be a really clean setup. I mean, look at that. That harness splits there, splits back there, and that's it. That's how clean this harness came out, and it is the most packed harness I've made ever. I'm never gonna see it again because it's just gonna disappear inside the engine bay.